It's been a while since the walk and talk, right? Walk and talk. So I'm calling. I had this like moment of like intuition yesterday, which which was about the history of pottery, which I know nothing about, obviously, but I had a quick look, I had a quick Google on what the history of pottery was there. Naturally, it's not about pottery; it's about consciousness, right? So yeah, and so the whole idea about this is see, it's not just pottery. It could be anything. It could be anything. But pottery's, I should probably have done it about music or something. It actually started off being about sculpture, but sculpture, maybe that works too. So the idea is that what happens, and I hope my connection might be bad here. I've got a new phone, and the new phone seems to take really good pictures, but it's crap internet, just really lousy internet on the phone. Anyway, we'll just stick with the history of pottery. What's interesting about it is, as a metaphor, is apparently, listen to me, man, why am I even talking about this? Apparently the history of pottery was about like when they started making ceramics thousands and thousands of years ago, they basically did it with mud and their hands, right? And so they'd use their hands to form cups or bowls and this kind of stuff, right? And that's the way it was done. Eventually, somebody would have a new idea. Maybe they would use one cup as a mold, for example, and they'd copy out that shape. Or maybe they'd use like a stick or a knife and start like cutting the God, this is a pretty limited metaphor here, but like, hey, the dogs. Hey, you guys. The dogs are happy. I've been out for a walk in a long time. Hey, buddy. So also, I'm not sure if have I got shag on here? I don't even know if there's shag on or not. But knives. They'd use a tool. They'd use a tool, and that would give them sort of more skill, more precision in creating the ceramic. Eventually, over thousands of years, they would develop a potter's wheel, right? And they'd rotate the wheel. Probably was done manually at first. Probably like your granny was there beside you, like spinning it, right? And you'd be like, then somebody figured, wait a minute, we can do like this. We can do this some other way. There's got to be a way of making that more automatic so that granny doesn't like break her fingers every day, you know? And then 1 second. Oh, wow, how interesting. Yeah, and then, so it'd be automated. Apparently there's 5 techniques in pottery, apparently. One of them being the wheel. Eventually they might think to themselves, well, you know, this is great. We're making these things. We're drying this stuff out in the sun, but it's not really that good. So they'd started thinking, maybe we can bake it. That might be better, right? So the point is, there's like a development. There's like a development, And what happens is each set of tools builds on the previous set of tools, right? So that idea, like maybe they were spinning the wheel manually, and then like, wait a minute, once you start doing that, that like births other ideas, and you start doing some different stuff with that new idea sort of fuels the next idea. And in turn, these create a precision, which is really quite, can be quite exquisite. Actually, interestingly, Rupert Spira, who's a famous non-dual teacher, is also a world-class potter. He's a world-class pottery, like, unbelievable potter. I actually went to look at it. At one point, I was thinking of buying one of his things as a gift, and apparently you can get like a vase for like a couple of grand, you know? I mean, it's that kind of quality for like a simple vase. But that's like an interesting thing. How can a vase cost $2,000? Right? I was just down at the Chinese shop here, the dollar store, a tienda china, and they're selling vases down there for $1. I know. I mean, it kind of has the same. It has the same kind of properties, right? It's like you fill it with water and put some flowers in it. It seems to work. So why would somebody pay $2,000 for something else? And I was considering it myself, So that's weird. Wow. I bought an iPhone. I hate it. I bought it for a job I'm doing, and I really hate the iPhone. But there are surprising things about it which pop up, like every now and then, Something just popped up just now. So what is the difference between a $2,000 and a $1 vase? Skill, technique, output. I just say the color in this image is, I mean, it just looks unbelievable. I guess that's one good thing about the iPhone. It really makes good looking color. Wow. Unbelievable. I'm gonna break from my talk about the pottery for a second, because this is just an example of what's going on in the world. Some of you may remember from years past, I always walked along the canal. This is the canal here, right? Always walked along here. Seems cool. But 3 months ago, there was an attempt to steal all the water. And what happened is this is just a really rough open canal. And in the course of a week, like hundreds of trucks were here, and they installed pipes. And the idea was they were going to like steal all the water and take it somewhere else, but there was a legal action. And they stopped the theft. Then they put up a sign saying it was actually it was like a betterment. It was for the betterment of society, which is just not true. This is happening all over the world right now. Of course, people are stealing water, right? For corporate interests. Anyway, the whole point about the whole Potter thing is that it's possible to achieve things in meditation. It's possible to achieve things in meditation, and but not when you're starting out usually, right? Because it's like it can be difficult. I talk to people sometimes, and it's like it's difficult to believe or to teach some of the things which are possible. And part of that's because there's like no frame of reference, right? It's kind of like what I was saying about the wheel, right? Like if you haven't used the wheel, you're not going to think about the efficiencies of a potter's wheel with a motor, right? It won't occur to you because you haven't even conceived of the wheel yet, right? But there were similar This is fun. I'm getting like the iPhone's throwing up like commands. It's saying to me, rotate left. What does that even mean? Okay, it's giving me suggested commands to use here. Don't know what that means. Anyway, there were similar efficiencies in, in consciousness when one is meditating. I'm just orienting myself energetically. What happens is that there are spaces in time when we occupy ego consciousness, right? And you just feel like Scott or you or whoever it might be. And it just feels really normal. It feels like consensus reality. Or what do I call it? I call it, let's just call it consensus. It just feels like reality, you know? But that reality is very much predicated on the injection of awareness into a specific layer of consciousness. Holy shit, dude, that's unbelievable. So there are infinite layers of consciousness which have appealed for your attention. And it's sort of like a branching network. So as you enter into one, more outcomes become available. As you go into those branches, like twigs or like smaller, well, not smaller, just more branches of consciousness become available in life. Now, I'm saying branches of consciousness, it sounds a bit abstract, but that stuff is actually made up of what you consider to be the contents of your life. And that's like a funny moment. Because what happens is you think the contents of your life are consensus reality. It all seems like it's sort of set in stone and, well, you know, I'm out here living in this world and that's life, and that's just not what's going on. What has happened is there has been a branching network of consciousness illuminated by awareness, and the pathfinding algorithm into that branching network is created primarily, I think, through karma, right? It's a karmic branching pattern. Now, it's interesting because a lot of people, you know, who do the whole non-duality thing, they tend to, a lot of people who go through the whole non-duality thing, they tend to negate the validity of reality, you know, and it's like, it's not real. And I totally feel that, man. I'm feeling that in a big way. But it's not, I'm not sure how interesting it is to talk about how it's not real. And it clearly is real at a certain level of consciousness, right? Because what's really happening here is, I think the tantric view of this is the best. The tantric view is it's both real and non-real, right? It exists and it doesn't exist. And that's, I gotta be careful here. Hold on a second, I'm just going down this hill. We've had rain for like 4 or 5 days here. And it's been extremely wet. So it's kind of muddy. So I'm coming down this muddy hill down here. This all used to be like open canal, and now it's all closed up. It's been concreted over. But we did stop them, so that's good. Actually, it was the community. I didn't do it. The community stopped them. There was like protests on the streets and stuff. Because if they take the water, this farming community dies, which has happened all over Chile. All of the water has been privatized, more or less. which is not that unusual in the world these days, right? Bill Gates privatizing all the farmland in the Midwest, etc. Because they're good people. Because they want the best for us. Let me just get this up here. There we go. Yeah, wow, I'm really impressed with the color in this. Wow, what amazing color. Yeah, so the branching structure, illuminated by the light of awareness. Now it sounds abstract, but this is like visceral. It's not an abstraction. I'm not speaking from a book here. Although if you wanted to read a book, the book to read would be, there's a bunch of them, but one good book to read would be the Recognition Sutras, which is also an audiobook read by the author. That is a work of genius. I hate to say it, that's a really good translation. I'm really opposed to Christopher Wallace's politics, but he's damn, he's a really good translator. But yeah, but generally, I'm speaking like off the cuff from momentary perception here. Yeah, I'm not reciting stuff I've read in books, although I have read them in books. But I'm reciting, not reciting. I'm observing from what, well, I guess I would say I'm observing from pure consciousness. But given that there are layers of consciousness, moving from what's known as Shiva through the world of, through the branching network, which might be known as Shakti, and there's like a graduated, dude, it's just unbelievable. And you see this network and the graduation and the transition from Shiva to Shakti is just basically hidden from us, you know. The transition and the ability to observe pure consciousness is basically just been, it's like the veil has been hidden from us. But it's possible to reveal that. There's a whole bunch of ways of doing it, which I've discussed. Wow, look how wet it was, look. You see that? That's usually really dry down there. And if you look there are horses down there drinking the water. Like, I think that's a horse there. There's a bunch of them. There's like a family of horses down there. It's really beautiful here. Actually, up on top of me, just up there, that's where I go running. That's on the main road, and that is that's known as the Mirador, or like the view. I'll just lift this up. You can see the landscape here. It's beautiful. All right. Unbelievable. That's not the Andes there, by the way. This is just like foothills. Like the Andes are like, I don't know, 70 miles and like over, like behind those. But they're actually huge hills, but they're nothing compared to the Andes, obviously, you know. Yeah. It's funny here, actually. Oh, this is the Mirador, so people come out here. People come out here at night and they party, which is why there's all this trash here. So it's covered with like beer cans and whatnot. There's like, people dump stuff too. There's like beds and whatnot. Sometimes I come out here and look for wood, like just to start the fire with, you know, because there's always like old crates and whatnot around. The refinement of consciousness. The refinement of consciousness. The purification of consciousness. The purification and refinement of consciousness. So maybe that's why you're paying a couple of grand for Rupert Spira's pottery. It's not just because he's sort of well known. It's because there's an extremely refined sense of consciousness. For example, if I was going to make a cup with clay, I've got some artistic talent. I could probably do something half decent. Not that I've ever done it before, but you know, I've got a good idea of shape and form. But I think what it comes down to is like it's like if you're on a potter's wheel, you often see people and what they're doing, like if you often see this, if you're observing lots of people in potteries, like there's, you often see people and they're like, they're tweaking the clay. And then just because they're just pushing a little too hard, the whole thing flops, right? Because they just haven't got the delicate sense of touch. And the other one is like they have to sort of press the clay together as it's spinning to sort of tease out an extremely fine layer of clay. And so part of that is going to be like sort of physical awareness. Like you're going to learn over time, like the sensation, and you'll get to know like when you've gone too far, like when you've pushed it too far, because you might be able to create something which is extremely thin and fine, but then you bake it and it just breaks instantly, right? Or you put it down heavily in the table and it cracks because it just hasn't got enough structure, right? So that's the kind of stuff that can only happen with like experience of what's happening. So it's the same thing in consciousness. Is like as you're, oh well, this has changed. Oh, this is funny. Every time I walk up here, there's this huge crevice, and this is not. What the hell created that? I always imagine it was some like, it's like Superman arrived in a meteor, like, and pulled this down, right? Because, I mean, I would want to think it's actually water erosion, but there's nothing similar above me, right? So it's like something created a massive hole in the ground. It's amazing. I think there's been work done here. So this is actually, this is me heading into a private parcella. This is like a private area here. I should probably not enter. There's usually a fence here, but that's been taken down. Yeah, so the awareness of structure. So this is what happens too, is like there's a huge amount of sort of awareness you can have during meditation of technique also. But in meditation, you're not dealing so much with clay, right? But you are dealing with the fine material, which represents, unbelievable. The fine material which represents reality as we know it. That's a nice piece of wood there. That would be good to throw in the fire. The fine material which makes up reality. And that is, what is it? So when people start meditating, they tell you to meditate on the breath, which is kind of like it seems like it's quite a fine, subtle object, but it's actually a kind of what I would call a gross object, actually, because it's a big physical object, right? So here's a good example. If you were to compare breath with the idea of a breath, which one's more quiet? A breath or the idea of a breath? Clearly, the idea of a breath is more quiet / more subtle form of the breath, right? It's more subtle. What's interesting is you could meditate on the idea of the breath rather than the breath. Now, that will be really, that might be boring at first. but it entails a level of awareness of the differences between the physical and the imaginary, because it's a thought. It's just an imaginary structure, right? Now, much like the potter who gains skills fine-tuning the width, and that's just one technique, like just using your fingers to sort of tease out the fine, subtle material of clay. I mean, you can do that with consciousness too, right? There's clear ways of being aware and mentally touching consciousness itself, approaching the material substance of what it appears to be, and working with it. It's incredibly subtle. I mean, it's unbelievably subtle. But much like the introduction to pottery, when you start off, you're not going to have the fine skills of Rupert Spira. But as you become more and more adept, you start gaining sort of expert level skills in discerning, the discernment of structure in the ineffable. That's what I should have called this. I think I'll change the name, The History of Pottery. Gonna get a whole bunch of like confused old ladies on here. What's he talking about? When did you start talking about pottery? The discernment of structure in the ineffable. That sounds more like me, right? There's a bed. Somebody threw a bed down from up there. Crazy party. Man, there's so much wood here, but I'm not gonna pick it up. These beautiful colors. Discernment of structure in the ineffable. Now, I've been rereading the Recognition Sutras myself recently, and what's interesting is he talks. I've got a video on here about the 36 tattvas, like 9 months ago, or probably a year ago. I did a video called the 36 tattvas, and I think it's a pretty good video explaining what the tattvas are. But I'd forgotten that he mentions the tattvas in the Recognition Sutras. The tattvas are is sort of like a map of it's like a map into consciousness, leading from the perception of sense, leading from the perception of sensuality, of touch, smell, sound, taste, sight. And the tattvas guide you through perception of the materiality of those. What's interesting about it, I was talking about this gradiated transition from Shiva to Shakti, right? So as you trace the tattvas, say you start thinking about the sense of touch, like as you close in, it's like as you close in on the sense of touch, like the sense of touch generally is like, oh, I feel something. But as you start contemplating the sense of touch, that becomes a much more sort of refined understanding of what the sense of touch is. And then you sort of zone in on what is perceiving and what is the perceived, what is touched, what is being touched, what senses touch, like who is sensing the touch, right? And is that separate from who you are? Is touch separate from your awareness? Then also, as you become more astute with this kind of inquiry, you start noticing that there's there's thousands of touch sensations which we're not cognizing, right? We're actually just working with a really simplified version of what that is. Well, this is actually a dangerous part here. This is always where I almost always fall down here. But I haven't. There we go. There are horse tracks up here too, so I guess the horses come up this way. Yeah, so this fine-tuned exploration from the senses. So if you think of the senses as like base camp, right? That's like base camp it's like base camp in Tibet below Mount Everest. And the 36 tattvas are like, represent the pathways up to the summit, which you can follow purely through observation and contemplation of what the senses actually are. And so what happens typically is, as you're contemplating this, is that reality disintegrates as we know it, because it becomes really obvious that that at least on some level nothing is real, right? It's all actually an illusion, which doesn't mean it's not real. It just means it's the physical manifestation of Shakti. So the ultimate ceramic artist in consciousness is Shakti. The ultimate, like the best. But in a way, you can't even talk about Shakti without talking about Shiva. Now, in the Recognition Sutras, now that I'm rereading it, Christopher Wallace does point out that, you can't really separate Shakti and Shiva. And so, like, in a lot of, like, the Kashmir Shaivism traditions, they tend to focus more on Shakti, but that it's implicitly included that consciousness is there at the same time. Like, you can't have one without the other. So they tend to just venerate the female form of the consciousness, but it includes both at the end of the day. So, but my understanding from meditation tends to separate those out. Wow, the colors are amazing. Look how blue that is. The contrast of blue and green. Oh my God, it's amazing. So what happens is, as you become aware, let's say, of the sense of touch, and then you think, well, how does it actually feel? What is the sensation? What is the sensation? Now, here's the funny thing, is like, in consensus consciousness, or I think sometimes I call that mundane consciousness, how can it be so green here? Is it really that green? It is. It's really that green. Hey! And he fell. But I got a save. That wasn't so bad. Could have been worse. This is the hill where you really have to look at where your feet are going. Wow. Gotta be careful with that one, man. Yeah, so what was I saying? Is yeah, here's the thing. Is as you become aware of, like, say, the feeling of touch, you have to sort of really focus in on it, and the feeling of touch, and it becomes the focus. This is a phrase I like to use a lot. Is sort of it's recursive, it's self-recursive. So what happens is your awareness of touch won't be very strong, but the more you focus on it, it forms kind of a loop. It forms kind of an energy loop, because it's like what's happening is your awareness is looking at another form of awareness, and it starts feeding back. And that is the key dynamic for profound meditation. Because once you get that feedback loop, it's like, you know, if you hear a guitar player and they put their guitar amp in front of the microphone, wah, you get Jimi Hendrix, right? But in meditation, you can do the same thing. And it's that feedback unravels reality. It unravels reality. And what happens is, well, this is a little worrying. There's like some holes in the ground here. There's lots of big spiders and stuff. You see them every now and then. The last time I was out walking, there was a big tarantula or something like that. It was huge. As consciousness unwraps, no, that in itself is astonishing. And part of the reason it's astonishing because what's unwrapping is identity. Because as objects, as the object of awareness unwraps, that also unwraps identity. Because your identity is linked, it's like networked with other objects. So as you move into this sort of feedback, self-recursive loop of meditation, it unwraps the reality which is created. It's almost like, what's it almost like? It's almost like you've got like a bonbon, right? Whatever that is. Say you've got like a little piece of caramel and then you cover it in chocolate. Now, if it wasn't covered with chocolate, you couldn't like, it wouldn't, I mean, it would still be a caramel, but let's say it wouldn't be a bonbon, right? And so your pure awareness, the pure awareness of Shakti is living in, the pure awareness of Shiva is living inside of you as like a caramel inside of a bonbon, but it identifies as a bonbon because it's covered with delicious chocolate. And as you immerse that chocolate in the intensive heat of self-reflective awareness, it melts away and it's no longer can be identified as a bonbon, right? Now it's something else. And more than that, the caramel's melting too, right? The whole thing is just melting. And the bonbon says, who am I? Can I really be a bonbon still? These are funny metaphors, but the feeling, the actual feeling when this happens is mystical. It feels like you've been transported to ancient India. You may have seen like people post pictures of like Persian temples, which have these incredibly designed, fractalized ceilings, just unbelievable. That's what it feels like when you unravel these moments of consciousness. The beautiful, because it's made of Shakti. It's not, this whole thing is made of Shakti, everything. So sure, maybe you can say it's all an illusion, but that whole part of it just being Shakti is not to be besmirched. It's not to be sniffed at. It's unbelievable. Wherever you place consciousness can unwrap like this. My God, that's unbelievable. It's funny because, you know, I like do these chats and I'm sort of out of practice, you know, but what happens is as you talk about it, your mind starts going into the zone, you know, and you start feeling it and like start perceiving it. Because like all morning I've been very much in the real world, like consensus reality. And now it's like, no. Now it's like the perception of the like the leaves and the plants are condensed forms of consciousness. They have been sculpted. Using techniques of awareness which we will never understand. Going to change angles here a little bit on the conversation. The perennial philosophy. I don't know much about the perennial philosophy. I've certainly heard about it before, and I've read up basically what it means. I guess it's from Aldous Huxley, and but it's basically, I think from what I read, because I encountered the perennial philosophy again 2 or 3 days ago. And it basically means that it basically discusses the like everything's unified. There's like a oneness. God exists, that kind of thing, and maybe also that there's a hierarchical a hierarchy emerging from divinity into the real world, kind of a thing. So maybe Aldous Huxley, maybe Julian Evola, some of those thinkers. I mean, I think it probably goes back to Greece. This is not a new idea, right? So I mean, it's like one of these philosophical ideas which has come down. Anyway, the reason it came into my awareness just recently was because, as some of you know, I interviewed Jason Rezor-Georgiani on the channel last year, probably, I think it was. I was really impressed with his book, Prometheus and Atlas, which was really eye-opening in a lot of ways. Really a work of genius, that book. It's not a spiritual book at all. It's a philosophical, historical book which pushes the boundaries into our awareness of alien life forms on this earth and this kind of stuff too. But it's a stunning book. Since then, I've read a bunch of his other books actually. I read his book Prometheism. I read his book Closer Encounters. I read his book, his new book. What was that called? Can't remember the name of it. It will come to me. But I was less impressed with the other books. I also got the Lovers of Sophia, which, really, really hardcore intellectual historical references. Difficult read. But good writer. But as of late, Jason started a movement, a political movement, which he calls Prometheism, which I've discussed a few times on the channel. You can watch my interview with him where we discuss some of these ideas. Prometheism is essentially the idea that what's wrong with the world is that the world has been taken over by the shadow aspect of the god Prometheus, right? Something of that nature. Or I think something like that. Although I think Jason thinks of it more as like an archetype than a god. But Jason's come out recently to say that Prometheism is Satanism. And I was on his group the other day just saying, and I kind of knew this already, but the problem is that as I'm moving through consciousness at a highly refined level, as I do, I get vibes from stuff, Particularly, I tend not to think about Satanism at all. And there's a reason for that, because I got a vibe off of that instantly. There's a major vibe off of Satan. I just think, just saying it now, there's a major vibe on that. But Jason's of the mind that, listen, Prometheus is the Greek, and then it goes to Lucifer, which is the Latin? And then that goes to Satan, which is the Hebrew. So he basically correlates those, and he's like, it's got nothing to do with demons or sex, or it's got nothing to do with those things, is his point of view in this. And knowing Jason, he'll have a great historical and philosophical justified argument for that, which will make my perception seem improbable, you know. But I was on his group the other day, and I was saying, I'm just trying to sort of grok this. I'm just trying to sort of understand like what it means. I'm trying to sort of, yeah, because he's being really outspoken about this being Satanist, you know. And in the way Jason says it, it's kind of provocative the way he says it too. He doesn't say, hey, listen. Oh, he does say it's philosophical Satanism. He does say that, right? But it is provocative to. I mean, you got to accept that for many people who are not schooled in many people who are not schooled into philosophy at that level are going to find it triggering, right? As I do, even though I understand it, like technically or whatever, to some extent, like I'm still like, I saw it. It's not working for me. And you know, in addition, I've got other problems with some of his ideas. Anyway, on the group, somebody said to me, "Well, you should read the the argument against the perennial philosophy." So I did a Google. I couldn't find it, but the guy sent me a link, and it's an article by Jason Rezarjani, wherein he eviscerates the perennial philosophy. Now, I just did a quick Wikipedia. I read through his article quickly, and his article was one that was classic Giorgiani of like massive historical and philosophical references, but yet with an air of personal indignity, or a sense of, I mean, you might say it's incendiary or full of passion, but there's a vibe in it which it just sort of feels slightly angry in some ways, and disrespectful to other people who don't get it, right? And I don't like that. I get it, but I don't. Well, part of my thing too is like, and this goes back into what I'm talking about, consciousness, is consciousness has a specific resonance. The fine material of consciousness means something, right? And that goes down to our attitudes that we think. It goes out to the words which we emit. These have a specific density of like divine energy. Now, it turns out I'm a deist, right? God doesn't just exist. The very materiality of who we are is the material of God, like of Shakti, Shakti infused with Shiva, infused with Shakti, right? It's obvious. Like if you do any serious meditation, you can't avoid this. You can't avoid it. It's just what it is. Now, I might not have said that 8 years ago, when I started having the spiritual awakening stuff and was seeing demonic figures and this kind of stuff. And in some ways that my skills at the potter's wheel of consciousness weren't good enough. They weren't refined enough. I hadn't spent enough time building tools of consciousness to let me perceive more deeply into what's actually going on. Jason's a really smart guy, and he's quite an intellect. And he's also apparently had a lot of major psychic events in his life. And he's not to be sniffed at, and he knows a lot of big shot players in the community, in the psych community, and various other levels. Oh yeah, and one of the things he's been talking about recently, he was dissing Jordan Peterson because Jordan Peterson did a video addressed to Muslims, and to be honest, it was embarrassing. I'm a big fan of Jordan Peterson myself. I like him, and I think he's got a lot of valuable things to say. But the Muslim thing was pedantic and embarrassing. And apparently Jason had been invited on to chat with him at one point with Jordan Peterson, but Jordan Peterson backed out of it because Jason's edgy, right? He will talk about edgy subjects like Satanism and destroy you in a conversation because he's that good, you know. But he was really down. He basically said something to the effect of, well, if you support Jordan Peterson, you better apologize to me or leave the group or something like that. I'm like, what? Anyway, as I was looking through his article, the article about against the perennial philosophy, basically it's basically an atheistic document. You know, it denies the divinity of material reality, and it denies the existence of what some people call the Tao, right? God, everyone, the indescribable. Now, lucky me, I've had experience of that, and I have experiences of it every day these days, you know. It's just amazing. It's unbelievable what happens, you know. I'm like, the other night I was having a beer. I was having a beer with, who was I having the beer with? And it just, the illumination of reality, even drinking a beer, it doesn't matter when, it just illuminates, woof, reality disintegrates and you become aware of divinity in that moment, and you're just like, it all unfolds. It's amazing. It's amazing. So I understand where Jason's coming from, because it seems, it's completely improbable. It's certainly, it's not possible to verify ever empirically. Ever. It's way too advanced. My hands are, hold on a second. It's way too advanced technology. If you want to call it technology, if you want to call divinity technology, the technology is so advanced that, dude, humanity will never be anywhere near that. You can experience this if you go to an ayahuasca ceremony, right? Go to an ayahuasca and you can get a sense of it. You can get a sense of it in ayahuasca, right? It's just like divinity is revealed, right? Watch any of thousands of ayahuasca testimonials where people's lives are changed because they see divinity. That's what happens in various masks. And it's possible to perceive this also through meditation, you know. And also, I've been foolhardy enough to do various energy transmissions from gurus, right? And that's had a huge impact on my perception and awareness of this. So it's not like I'm a genius meditator, although I'm good at it now just because of the transmissions, right? Because everything just it became obvious, right? It became obvious what to perceive and what to focus on. But anybody who's not done the work, even if you've got lots of psychic experience, like Jason's got, I don't know what kind of, he knows a lot. I mean, I don't know how much meditation he's done. He knows everything about Buddhism and Tantra, everything. He knows way more than I do, like intellectually. But see, none of the intellect stuff matters. All that matters is can you drill down using the feedback loop of consciousness into material reality into pure awareness. None of the intellectual constructs matter. They're all completely, they're a network of, I don't want to say lies, but they're a network of each node of truth on the network of lies, right? It creates a patina of reality, but it's not actually, it's of no consequence. Science and the intellect are of no consequence in this world. Sorry, I know that seems, well, you're using the internet, Scott. That's science, right? Okay, fair enough. I'm just telling you, it doesn't matter. My hands are. So this, well, I've been talking for a while, huh? A second. Boop. Hey, look at that. Hey, Cecily. I didn't have the I didn't have the chat turned on there. I'm just noticing that some people have said hello. Hello. So the oh yeah, so I'm on this group the other day, and I just mentioned, I'm like, thanks for sending me that article. That's really good. And I was like, I just said casual, I'm like, I guess I'm not a Prometheus because I've experienced the Tao. I've got experience of that, and I've also had direct transmissions from 3 or 4 different teachers. Like profound transmissions. And I only said that as like a point of discussion, and I was instantly banned. Like within seconds, I was banned from his group. Like, what? That doesn't seem like a great intellectual feat, right? Anyway, I sent Jason a message and was like, what the fuck, man? You guys are like banning me because I mentioned the truth. But he apologized and said it was all good, while saying I'm definitely not a Prometheus. The thing is with Prometheism is it's predicated on material reality, and also there's a lot of interesting things about the Prometheism, but it's there's a bunch of things about it which are wrong. They may be justified historically and through literature, but it's just wrong, like its outlook on many of these things. Yeah, so it's been interesting because I've been going back and forth with Giorgiani's work for a while. His Closer Encounters book, which is about the alien, the UFO phenomenon, which he's very knowledgeable about. And he's met with Jacques Vallée and some of the big UFO people, and he's the first time I read it, I thought it was a lousy book. Second time I read it, I thought, actually no, it's got there's some good material in here. It's pretty well written, I guess, Then he's written 2 books, which are novels. And his last book, the last novel I read, it's mixed. I mean, there's parts of it which are good. It feels kind of like a Philip K. Dick novel. I went through a period of reading everything P.K. Dick wrote. There's a vibe of P.K. Dick in it, but just some weirdness too. Some weird stuff. But I mean, you can learn a lot from Giorgiani because he's got a grasp of a lot of facts which people just don't know exist. One of the facts which blew me away was that Jeffrey Epstein, I'm going there, Jeffrey Epstein had a submarine on Pedophile Island. They had a submarine. And Ghislaine Maxwell was a certified submarine pilot. This just blew my mind. And they were taking famous people on the submarine down to the ocean floor to look at, who knows, but it just happens to be that where they were going happens to be known as the possible location of Atlantis. And apparently Epstein had a temple to one of the Atlantean gods on the island. Isn't that crazy? And apparently Stephen Hawking, the famous mathematician, went with him on the submarine. So lots of interesting artifacts there about what was that all about, right? I mean, that's potentially mind-boggling. Ghislaine Maxwell's a submarine pilot, and maybe the whole the conspiracy theorist comes out and is like, well, maybe it wasn't about pedophilia, maybe it was about Atlantis, right? And of course, Giorgiani Ghislaine Maxwell makes an appearance in his novel. She shows up in his novel. And in his novel, a transgendered woman comes back from the future to meet Jason Giorgiani. She's a reincarnation. Oh no, she's not reincarnation. She's a genetic clone who's been feminized or something and comes back to meet Giorgiani. And with the help of Ghislaine Maxwell, which I thought was weird at the time because I didn't know she was part of this Atlantean subtext. Yeah. Anyway, what's interesting about it though too is that there's a belief that science, because Giorgiani believes that by 2030, I think, is that general artificial intelligence will be achieved. And when that happens, his belief is that when artificial intelligence is provoked and connected with human minds, that psychic abilities will become obvious. So people won't be able to hide, people won't be able to pretend that there's no psychic world anymore, because the material, the veil of material consciousness will be eviscerated, and so it will make it too obvious. It could be about both, you know. So yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting things to say, you know. I guess my big problem with him is that he's not. Well, for example, he's very down on the devas, right? He sees the Indian devas, and he talks about this in Closer Encounters. He talks about basically, he goes through like long tracks of biblical text trying to prove that they're actually talking about aliens, right? And I'm not sure how compelling they weren't, what's the word I like to use? They weren't persuasive to me. But he did do some work on that. And he also thinks the Hindu devas are aliens. Now, as you know, I've done quite a lot of evocation of Hindu devas. In particular, Shiva, Krishna, Lakshmi, Tara, tons of them. Ganesha. Dude, read chapter 10 and 11 of the Bhagavad Gita. You see, what Giorgiani thinks is that by the time we get general artificial intelligence, that we'll be able to fight against the devas, who he sees as invasive. He sees them as invasive UFOs. But I think part of the problem is he's plotting consciousness in time-space, right? He sees the UFO phenomenon is he's using physical reductionism, right? So he's all these issues, which are fascinating ideas, he's locating them in time and space. So he's making them part of this sort of network of lies, right? They're sort of each one of these, and he does these empirical proofs, which are amazing. They're amazing, but each one, while true, is false in that it shouldn't be plotted in time-space. So I think, like, the truth is if you look at Krishna, if you evoke Krishna, it would be very easy to see this as, there's no way he experienced them in the fullness. Yeah, exactly. Like, if you evoke Krishna, you might perceive it as an alien, but dude, it's not an alien. It's divinity. One of the best books I've read about this, and it's kind of a stupid book, but it's a really good description of what might be this case. It's one of those. What's it called? I've mentioned it a bunch of times. It's called The Prism of Lyra. You can find it free. Google it. There's a PDF for free. Short book, about 100 pages, and it describes the descent of consciousness from divinity to the world. And it describes it going through the planets and astrology and going through the various sort of alien figures who might emerge. But they're not aliens from Lyra, even though they might appear that way. Lyra is a point in consciousness, not a point in space, right? It's a point in consciousness. So it has this hierarchical structure, which is promulgated, I guess, by the that thing I was talking about, which Aldous Huxley did, which is called the philosophy, forgot the word, the perennial philosophy, which talks about this kind of hierarchical structure, right? And Julian Evola's written a book about this, which is just unfucking believable, that book. Julian Evola is one of the great intellectuals of all time. He blows Giorgiani out of the water. Sorry, Jason. Unbelievable. Giorgiani's probably as smart, I think, but Evola's much wiser. He's much wiser. But these characters emerge through consciousness. Whereas, you know, if we're writing books and making empirical proofs, we're working in one of the layers of awareness and not moving between them. Which is understandable, because I mean nobody wants to conceive of the idea that divinity might be true. I assure you it is. It's just too unbelievable to believe that it might be true. There's no evidence of it. And a part of the reason for that is kind of like it's because it's so close to us that we look past it. And this is one of the things about awakening, is people don't awaken because they don't know where to look. And they're looking, what happens is they end up looking far away to try and find where awakening might be. And it's actually right here at this moment, which is difficult to locate. The mind doesn't know where to locate it. So I think that's what the transmissions facilitate. The transmissions I was going to cross over here, but I don't think I'm going to do that. It's a bit muddy. I don't want to fall into the canal. Whoop. Yeah, I guess I'll just go back. The thoughts on idolatry. Yeah, actually, the thoughts on idolatry, that goes into the whole, it was actually, yeah, I was going to do a video about that, but I'm probably not going to get around to it. So I'll just mention it here quickly, is the thoughts on idolatry. Excuse me, it's getting warm here all of a sudden. Thoughts on idolatry are this, is that I was talking about that, I was talking about the feedback loop, which disintegrates consciousness, right? The feedback loop which disintegrates consciousness. Well, what happens is the feedback loop can also, depending on your state of awareness and I think what happens is, before you become aware, you can enter into feedback loops located on one plane of consciousness. And so what happens is that feedback loop reinforces itself, and it, as feedback loops tend to do, I guess that's what feedback loop implies. It self-reinforcing a loop of awareness. And that's basically what idolatry is. What it does is it reinforces something which is true but not real, in the same way that divinities, like, so what idolatry does is, let's just call it, take any thought structure, and then you channel energy recursively through this. The object in the mind becomes highly energized, and it starts taking on almost a life. It starts taking on a life of its own, in a way. And that life wants to believe that it is it's an individual consciousness, which is separate from divine reality. And in a way, this is kind of what Giorgiani is like, because Giorgiani is very much about, I mean, I think Giorgiani would be very comfortable quoting Satan from Paradise Lost, right? He'd be very comfortable, like the famous quote, "Is better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven." And I think Giorgiani would be done with that, you know? He's kind of like, his whole thing is like, we have to prepare So when the devas come, we can destroy them, kind of thing, you know. I don't think he'd be off. I'm sort of like, I think he'd probably say that. But you know, like I was saying, you can't, dude, you can't fight Krishna. It's just stupid. It's like, it's a whole different level of awareness. Like, awareness itself is reality. Reality itself is based on minor energy structures emerging from an afterthought of something Krishna did. It's just not even important. And reality was formed from that. We are like the cusp of some kind of like turbulence wave off the back of Krishna's movement. I mean, the level of power in these energy structures is beyond anything humanity can think about. So the idea that genetic manipulations or any genetic manipulations or artificial intelligence, dude, is stupid, dude. It's so, it doesn't seem stupid, but if you've got direct experience of evoking divinity, get real, dude. It's just not happening. It's actually exactly right. It doesn't work, right? You can't do that. And I can understand why people might think, you know, but it's hubris, right? It is satanic, and I mean, you can see Satanism as like as heroic figure, but the truth is, like, dude, the thing is, it's self-proving. Like what I'm talking about, this is not a point of view. This is not my point of view. My belief is that reality is like this. It's like gnosis. It's self-proving. When you move into the pure consciousness, it's obvious that this is true. At least from the level of like whatever humans can understand. This is obvious. Reality itself is made from this language, and you're not going to be changing this. And the whole idea of fighting against it becomes stupid because the words fight against it are made of some kind of the words you're using are actually part of the energetic structure of Krishna. So it's stupid. It's like you can't even go there. What the best thing you can do is just recognize, as the recognition sutras say, is just recognize divinity. And the moment you do that, and this is funny because like my life's been far from perfect. I'll tell you something, like in the last year or so, just like actually like doubling down on this whole idea about divinity, dude, it just seems like sort of everything sort of starts working in your life. Everything sort of starts just working out, and like magically, like things sort of just go really well, and it's this sort of alignment. The language of reality starts sort of aligning into plausible phrases, and everything starts just making sense, and like it's obvious, which is interesting because Georgiani has not had an easy life lately. You know, he was basically fired from his professorship. He's a really fascinating guy. I mean, he's been involved in, like, his family's Iranian. He speaks Iranian and all kinds of languages, and he was involved in the political circuit in Iran, and he was involved in the alt-right in the States. But before it got bad mouth, he was trying to guide it in the right direction. And he basically got filmed by some left-wing journalist who misrepresented what he was trying to say. Lost his job. And in a way, I think he's been cranking out books. He's going to make a living, you know. So I think part of his book output's about that. And yeah, so I think some of his books, they're really well done intellectually. But the intellectual plane is a zone of consciousness. It's not the only zone. So I think a lot of his books lack contemplative wisdom. But they certainly make up for it with, like, just pure incendiary intellect, you know? I think that's a good point there, Mikkel. Good old lucifuge, right? Good old lucifuge. Yeah, and the thing is, like, you know, like, yeah. Listen, there's lots of magicians online who evoke the demonic figures, you know. I haven't done that intentionally. I've had some evocations of demons and stuff, and it was enough for me, man, you know. But yeah. Hold on, man, that's interesting. But yeah, so anyway, so I think the main point here is like learning to use the tools of consciousness, right? Learning how to, and I think like the location of your place in consciousness. Thanks, Miguel. I actually don't feel that great. I think this camera is really good, but I've actually been out running like 5 kilometers a day, but yeah, I gotta get. Well, it's winter too, so I haven't been doing that much. Other than that, this is the first time I've been out walking in a while, so that's good. Yeah, these tools of consciousness are like learning how to use consciousness as a tool to move beyond consensus material reality and perceive the different branching structures of consciousness. And as we do that, there's like a toolkit which you can acquire through awareness. Now, some of those toolkits might be like Vipassana meditation, Nidra yoga, chakra meditation, energy work. They're all kind of related, really. I mean, they all use different names. They're just, I think it's basically all the same thing, just from different perspectives. But yeah, so I mean, you can do this focus on the senses, and that's one particular form of meditation. And then you can move into the imagination and then focus on the underlying energy. Then you can trace the energy up through the senses and follow this through. But as you're doing this, like reality kind of disintegrates as you're doing this, perceptually, right? It becomes clear that, yeah, as you're doing that kind of movement, you become aware of other higher intelligences instantly because you've broken through the veil of awareness. And these other entities are here while invisible. Don't feel them right now, but they're here from other dimensions, multi-dimensional reality. And yeah, Giorgiani's always talking about like the Nazis gained, he thinks the Nazis gained the ability to move back in time. And so the Nordic race of aliens are actually the Nazis. Could be true. But I think time, while fascinating, is probably the least fascinating of all the dimensions. There's other dimensions which are more profound and have a bigger impact on reality. And those can generally be accessed through meditation and prayer, I guess. Anyway, I'm actually back at the house now, so I think I'm going to call it quits. Kind of a long chat. I wasn't planning on doing too much, but there you go. Sort of looking forward to coming back here and seeing what how the color looked. I mean, the color seems spectacular here. I'm just going to come over here, see the oranges. They're pretty orange. Are there any ready to eat? Maybe not. I don't know. They seem kind of hard. Yeah. I'll get some later. Yeah, guys. Talk to you later. Peace out, you guys.